Okay, take 47. So, hi there, this is Alec Soth at my studio in St. Paul, Minnesota. I've been having some technical difficulties this morning. It's funny, these videos, when I started them back in the pandemic, I had a lot of time on my hands. The first one I did was simply a recording of my Zoom screen talking to myself. I had no intention of being a YouTuber. And I had no idea that anyone would actually watch these things. It's still bewildering that people do. So thank you for that. And I know some of you like to fall asleep to them. So I've taken out the ads in the middle and I hope they're restful. This one's going to be particularly restful, I think, because this is going to be a long, meandering talk about my most recent book, Advice for Young Artists. But along with that, I want to talk about all sorts of different things. And one of those things is this desire to be a beginner, to goof around, to learn something new, to decide to make a YouTube video, even though you don't think anyone's going to watch it, or to start a new project, but not with the idea of selling things and all of that, but of just trying something new, feeling that experience. And this book, Advice for Young Artists, came out of that spirit. I'm in my 50s and I'm constantly trying to figure out how to do this thing with new energy, basically. And what that means usually is that if I have some grand idea, it's probably not going to work. That I simply have to start playing and see where it takes me. And that was definitely the case for Advice for Young Artists. And what I want to do here is take you through the evolution of the project. And this is the deep dive for those of you that want it, about how one particular project might come about. So this right here is what's called the LBM Dispatch. So basically this is in 2012, but in this time of year, almost exactly in 2011, on my birthday, I wrote my friend Brad Zeller and I said, I want you to give me a present. And what I want you to do is to go out into the world with me and let's pretend that we're newspaper reporters. I'll be the photographer, you'll be the writer, we'll go tell a story. And we did this and we had a lot of laughs, we had a lot of fun, and we started doing more of it. And then in May of 2012, he and I decided to produce an actual newspaper, and we traveled around Ohio with an assistant, Galen Fletcher, and we had so much fun, and we didn't know where it was leading us, but we had a lot of laughs and I think made some really fantastic work also. Now, one of the pictures that no one remembers, or so it seems, is this one. The title of it is Horror Hotel Convention and Movie Festival, Clarion Inn, Hudson, Ohio. There was another picture here also from that horror convention. And that picture was largely forgotten, except that in, I don't know what year this was. This is 2022. This magazine, Reedition Magazine, which is a big, chunky fashion magazine, asked me to do a fashion shoot based on that picture. And they had this idea of me photographing at a horror convention. And turns out these exist in suburban hotels across the country. I found one in Plymouth, Minnesota, and did this fashion shoot. Now, the funny thing about this, so this cover image was made at the horror convention. If you can see here, wow, it's really hard to see, but there is like this woman dressed up in a horror outfit. And then what we did is we did casting. So these two people, we did casting locally to find people and to fit them in clothes and basically take them to the convention to photograph them. The problem was that the guy, the tyrant who was running this convention, I don't think he was really tyrant, but maybe he had some power issues. He had given us permission, it was all signed off, and then at the last minute, he changed his mind. So we weren't allowed inside. So in fact, most of the pictures were not made at the horror convention, and I needed a backup plan. And so what I did is I rented a house in Plymouth. And this was like an Airbnb. It was, as you can see, it's dated. It's sort of 1980s decor, suburban rambler. And I had this idea of taking the various people that we had cast for this fashion shoot and bringing them to the house and making it a kind of party, a sort of party of outsiders. So I've always been interested in goth culture and the idea of being an outsider, but being connected by your outsiderness. So that picture I showed of those people in that hotel room watching the film, like they are outsiders, but they want to go to a hotel and hang out with other outsiders. That interests me. And so I like this idea of this kind of house party of people that don't know each other. And as part of this, I hired a woman to do drawings in the house. So we had like different kind of things happening. And this shoot was super fun. And frankly, it was like way better than photographing at the horror convention. So you can get the vibe of this. And we just used all of the existing decor. We did venture out into the surrounding areas a bit. There's the cover image. I love these drawings. So it was kind of a happening. It was an event. And then, like these pictures are from the convention itself and then back at the house, etc. So basically, I did this project and I felt inspired. I felt inspired that it had started as one thing and turned into something else, which was of particular interest to me. A party of loners, a party of people that don't want to be at a party, that kind of thing. There was something about that was exciting to me. Okay, so then I got an assignment by the New York Times to go photograph in Kentucky. I'm not going to show you that work. It was okay. It was a very serious assignment. It had to do with the police. Anyway, I hired an assistant to travel with me, and that particular assistant had been involved in the casting of the horror convention people. Basically, she helped go out in the world and find people that had the right look. And she had this skill. She had interpersonal skills to do that sort of thing. And so I said to her, London is her name, I said, how about we go to Kentucky, we go do this police story, and then when we're done, we'll stay in Lexington and we will attempt to do loner party on the run like this. We'll find an Airbnb, and then we will go out into the community and look for loners and invite them to a party. And it's going to be amazing, and I'm going to make great work. Well, we tried. It was extremely challenging. I could not find an Airbnb that had any of this kind of dated quality, because there was something about like Scream movies, this like dated sort of environment, and you couldn't find it on Airbnb. So that didn't work. And then you approach someone at a coffee shop and say, would you like to come to a party of strangers? You're going to get turned down no matter how charming your assistant might be. So we were struggling. And so then I had the idea of, okay, what if I used my sort of reputation in the arts to contact a university and look around there for people. And basically what I said was, and this is in Kentucky, I said, I'll come visit your program, and if you can do a talk or a Q&A or meet with a class or something, and in exchange, I'll look around and see if I can find someone of interest. And so I set that up, and it was with an MFA program, and I had a lovely visit, but I didn't find the people. And I kind of knew immediately that part of the thing that was missing was that they were MFA students. They just didn't have the vibe that I was looking for whatever reason. And so I thought this would be interesting to try it again, but do it with undergraduate students. And so London and I had driven to Kentucky. And so I thought, okay, let's drive home and let's go through Tennessee, and I'll make a connection with a university there and see what can happen. And so I contacted Middle Tennessee State University, where Christine Potter and Shannon Randall teach, who I've interacted with in the past, and wrote them and asked if I could visit and exchange photograph people. And they were super accommodating. Oh, there was one thing I forgot about. This is important. When I was in Lexington, this guy, let me show this picture. This kid biked up to me, basically. And I was taking a picture just of nothing, basically. And he rode up and he recognized me. He had studied photography and he recognized me. I don't know if he was exactly right for the outsider party. I can't remember if we invited him, but we never did it there anyway. But basically, I enjoyed him and I enjoyed his spirit. And this was part of the reason that I decided to search for undergraduates. So on that drive back, we went to Middle Tennessee State University and I met with, I think it was a photography 1 class, and I just loved it. I just loved the spirit of the students. And a lot of them weren't like photo majors, but they had that thing where they had developed a roll of film and they were excited about it and everything was new. And something started to change for me around that time where I'm like, maybe what I'm interested in are people like this and not necessarily people like this. And just follow my intuition and see where that takes me. And I know that when I was in that area and in Nashville, I contacted someone else who led me to I ended up photographing his girlfriend. I took this picture, which I liked a lot. And I thought, okay, there's something about young people, art students, creative people who are at the beginning of creativity that I wanted to explore. So this is not like a totally new subject for me. I've been interested in youth, but also like education, art education at its beginnings for a very long time. It seems like every interview I do, I try to talk about my high school art teacher who completely changed my life. So when I was in high school, I was not a goth kid. I think I wish I had that identity at the time to attach myself to, because it would have been useful, because then I could have found community with that. But I was an outsider in many ways. No, I wasn't. Outsider's too strong of a word, because I was very normie, but I was super shy. And I had a big wall around me. And I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. When I was a little kid, I was very creative and had all these pretend friends and all that. But as a teenager, I was a bit lost. Then I have this high school art teacher, Bill Hardy, and he saw something was going on in that shell, and he gave me some tools to crack a hole and find my way out of that shell. And I feel like I owe my life to him in so many ways, and I've always wanted to do that for other people. So this took me down a sort of educational path, which I want to talk about for a second. So, and particularly with young people and people that were at the very beginning of their creative journey. And so I was interested in teenagers and people in the high school age. And so a number of years ago, I can't remember what year, I don't know, 2015, I don't know. I started a project called the Winnebago Workshop. And I'm going to just zoom in here. And so these are some snapshots. And what we did basically, here, I'll move this to the side, is I had this RV, the Little Brown Mushroom RV, and we ended up doing a series of trips, but then we did a long cross-country trip from Minnesota to New York, producing work along the way. Here we are in Detroit. This is with the writer John Green right here, the young adult novelist, who's a real hero of mine in the way that he's sort of given back to young people in so many ways. So he agreed to visit us, and I worked with this group, and it was amazing, and experienced a lot of great things. But one of the things that I learned was, oh, I'm not my high school art teacher. I don't necessarily have the same gifts that he has. And in many ways, one of my assistants on this project, Galen Fletcher, I felt like he was the one connecting well with the students, and I was more like the organizer of this thing. Anyway, why am I telling you all this? That's because this is another kind of experimental project where I'm just throwing myself into something, and I learned a lot of things. But one of the things that I learned was that, okay, maybe I'm not the best in this situation, but I'm better on a one-on-one basis. So this kid right here, Cooper went on to work with me over the years. Cooper's a painter, and then I invited him to various trips. So this is my book, A Pound of Pictures. And A Pound of Pictures has some, you see the seeds of what I was doing in Advice for Young Artists in this work. I've already done a video on A Pound of Pictures. I'm not going to go into it. But basically, here is Cooper. He joined me on a trip. He's drawing out his window. I find, interestingly, he's drawing with his left hand. And he does that regularly as a way to bring about that beginner spirit, right? So I learn stuff from him, and I also like absorb some of his creative energy while traveling with him. Another person I traveled with on this project was my daughter. So that's Carmen right there. Some of you might be familiar with this book, which is Dog Days Bogota. And so here's little Carmen as a baby. And then here she is at age, I don't know, 17, 18, something like that, on this road trip with me. And an amazing thing about parenting is that you are constantly thinking about these different stages of life and this sort of newness one feels, but of course you're watching it from this other perspective, a parental perspective. And very often your job as a parent is to protect your children and all of that. And you yourself are not always experiencing that newness, right? So, but it's something that I'm interested in and want to hopefully pass on to my kids. Around that time, maybe a little bit later, I did this funny project with Magnum Photos, and it was basically commissioned work on the subject of family, and the work I did was with my daughter, and basically we went out together, and she was taking pictures and I was taking pictures. So here she is photographing through her hair. And so like this is her photograph. And what I love is this is like the first time a person uses manual film camera and the excitement of that, and like, oh wow, these colors are going to come out in this way, but you don't know how they're going to come out until you develop it. I mean, I know I'm saying something that's obvious to all of you, but for those of you that have been doing it for a long time, you can forget that feeling of newness. So it was fun to go with her and look at her and think about this kind of experience of newness. And here she's photographing me, and we're playing. Anyway, this stuff, working with young people, thinking about newness, this is constantly on my mind. So one of the reasons I wanted to bring up Carmen is that I decided for a second trip after that one to Kentucky and Tennessee, I wanted Carmen to be my assistant. And what I told her is, I want to go on a trip across the country, and I decided to go to Louisiana. And I said, let's drive to Louisiana. You'll be my assistant. And along the way, we'll visit various undergraduate art programs. And I will try to get access and take pictures. She'll assist, but she can also have the opportunity to look at these places. Now, I should mention that Carmen's not an artist, has no desire to be a photographer, but I thought it'd be interesting for her. She, at this point, was taking a gap year, and I thought it'd be interesting for her to see these places. And so for me to like simultaneously think about being young, being her age, and make work, but also try to kind of inhabit that space for myself, if that makes sense. So with that spirit, we went on this road trip. And one of the very first places we went was one of the very first pictures in the book right here. And this is at the University of Iowa. So one thing you'll notice is that this picture, wow, does it not look like this picture? So this 8x10 camera, film, all of that. So when we went to Iowa, I actually photographed in this style, and then went back to the hotel that night, and I was like, no, it's wrong. I shouldn't be photographing that way. The kind of earnestness of these pictures was in fact not, it felt inauthentic to the way I was feeling, basically. So this is the complicated part of this book and this project, and it's probably the more challenging part. But basically, I'm talking all idealistically about youth and newness and all that, but I wasn't feeling that way, really. I was feeling more like this guy, a little worn down. One of the ways I describe this stage of life that I'm in, the mid-50s, is that it's like I'm a teenager for old age. I'm not old yet, but it's right there and it's coming. Okay, so let's open the book here. So it starts with this Post-it note. This is not a physical Post-it. It's printed on. It's actually printed with fluorescent ink, so it required a whole separate pass through the printer. We did consider actual physical Post-it notes, but my fear was that it was going to get too sort of fussy and arts and craftsy. The idea for this, well, there's different elements. So this is a Little Brown Mushroom book published of Trent Park, and on all of our Little Brown Mushroom books, we had these nameplates, these stickers, and this Little Brown Mushroom belongs to, and the owner writes their name in. So the idea is that it could be a place for that. Who is this book for? And you buy this book and you put your name there. But then the other idea is that this is a place where I would sign the book and I would sort of mark it as mine. This book is for Alec. Because the big question when you look at the cover, Advice for Young Artists, who's it for? Is it for young artists or is it for me? So then we have the title page and there's that question. This picture, this was actually made in Louisiana on that same trip with my daughter. And I like this, and I'm going to say things here that I probably shouldn't, but this is the way my brain works. I like that the beginning of the book is a doorway. So in the kind of corny sort of way, it's a doorway to art. It's a doorway to expression and all of that. But the doorway is blocked, except that there's a stairwell here. And you can walk and you can find your own way. These are the kinds of narratives I tell myself. One thing I wanted to show you are these. So these little tiny prints here, look at that. There's that picture I originally showed you. These are how I edit. And basically, I lay out all of these things, and I make sequences, and I make a structure, and I try to have a beginning and a middle and an end. Very often, the picture that goes before the title, to me, it's like the opening credits of a movie, and it's a chance to sort of set the tone. And so this, like, hard, banal, somewhat ironic picture, comedic picture, is setting the tone for the book. Then we come here, and I already talked about this. One thing that I want to mention is that most of the pictures were made on a tripod. They don't need to be made on a tripod, but I liked this funny way of working, which was both slow and fast, and things are a little off kilter, but I'm still working on a tripod. Okay, the beginning of the book starts without people. So there's just a suggestion of a person in this blackboard drawing. This is a place for a model to sit and be drawn. There's a question of how do I pair pictures? Why are they sometimes alone? Why are they sometimes paired? For me, when I'm laying out those little prints that I showed you, what I'm trying to do is develop a rhythm. It's a musical feeling. So there are intuitive elements and there are rhythms. So to me, there was even something about the pink of this color. It's very hard to see here, but there's a pink chalk. And then we flip here. And so this picture was made at RISD, and I'm giving a lecture. So I am on stage looking at the young people looking at me. Again, in the question, who is this book for? Is it for this audience out here, or is it for me on stage? What the hell's going on here? Why is there a mouse in this little box? So that's the response that I hope people have. This is the tricky thing about making work too, is I don't know how people are going to respond. But one of the things that I know as a viewer is that I like some confusion. I like to flip the page and sometimes be surprised. Now, what I'll tell you is that this picture was actually made at RISD as well. RISD has a large collection of taxidermy for students to draw. Most of it's large, but there was this tiny little mouse preserved in this little box. I photographed it on this piece of paper to hopefully kind of suggest that it could still have been made at an art school, but probably people aren't going to think about that. What was I thinking about? I was thinking about this audience looking at me on stage and feeling like this. Okay. Now, this Post-it is more in the spirit of the rest of the Post-its in the book. And basically, I also want it to be a little confusing, but I want it to be suggestive of advice, patience, etc. Like, the idea here, as I was thinking of it, was that this is a placeholder. I'm going to put some really sage wisdom here about how you're supposed to be patient as an artist. But I don't have time for it right now, and I don't really know what it is. This book doesn't really have advice. Advice doesn't work. If I tell my kids, you need to be patient, that's not helpful advice usually. If you tell a young art student that they have to work for 10 years, 10,000 hours before they do anything, like, that's not really helpful. They're excited, they want to make work. Advice usually isn't that helpful. And I'm playing with that here. Also, there's something about the handwriting. This is something that's existed in my work throughout. So if you look at the back of Niagara, there are handwritten notes. I could actually show that to you here. So here's the book Niagara, and then back here are my handwritten notes. A similar thing exists with Broken Manual. This is actually a great example. So this is a title of a picture, and it gives almost no information. In a lot of these YouTube videos, I've talked about the use of text and this question of how much information should you give a viewer. And I'm kind of playing with that here, with this lack of information. And then this this is just a still life, another still life. I was working at different types of schools. So this picture was actually made at Harvard. Where was I here? I don't even remember now. So many schools. It doesn't matter which school it was made at. And I don't think of these pictures as I'm not trying to get the kind of intimacy in the same way that I would in large format work. It's more fleeting. But interestingly, this subject, I think, is evocative of that kind of goth outsider spirit, this I hate God t-shirt. So there are traces of that. But then it's followed by almost the opposite, this smiling boy. And then we're back to this goth-like woman coming down the stairs, these minimalist pictures. These are painting grayscales from different students. So I was taking pictures that they have this kind of frontal quality, and with the flash, there's even if they have deep space, there's a feeling of lack of space. And there are pictures that are jam-packed with colors, and then there are pictures that are almost black and white. They're quite minimalist. Interesting footnote to this picture is that the painter here is actually Cooper, who I mentioned before from the Winnebago workshop and that's traveled with me. This picture was not actually made at an art school. Cooper went to the University of Minnesota, but he's graduated now. I didn't have rules. I didn't have to photograph at art schools. I could include pictures from other places. That's the beauty of making personal work, is there aren't rules. Similarly, like I could photograph when I was doing Sleeping by the Mississippi. I didn't have to be exactly by the Mississippi River. Another example of that is this picture, which was not made in an art school at all. But at a certain point, I worked in flowers into the book. I'm interested in, if to be obvious, like flowers that are dying, that that are or that are like teenager flowers about to die. And I'm also just doing lots of formal stuff. So one of the things about art education and sort of painting and drawing 101 is that you were dealing with formal issues. How do I draw a bottle? That kind of thing. How do I arrange a still life? What does it mean to have color and no color? And I had a blast. One of the things that was most enjoyable about making this work was just allowing myself to play with formal issues. But of course, hopefully I'm doing other things and more complicated things as well. So this picture I think is kind of complicated. There's a lot going on. So let me try to tell the story behind it. So first of all, I visited the school and visited a critique that was happening. And this young woman had her photograph on the wall in which she had taken a self-portrait like this with a bulb cable release. And I loved it. I mean, there's something about that impulse to take a self-portrait when you're young that's just automatic. It's always struck me as kind of comforting that even someone like Walker Evans, the very sophisticated Walker Evans, early on took pictures like this and like these, and we all do it. I did it as well. This is one that I took in college, and so I saw this, and I thought, that's such a natural impulse. It's something we're not supposed to do now. You get more sophisticated and you realize, oh, I shouldn't do that. But I love seeing it. And for those of you that saw my YouTube video on Rosalind Fox Solomon, she continued to follow through on that impulse her whole life. And it's so valuable, I think. So one of the things that I was feeling at this time was, oh, rather than push that away, I want to explore it. I say this is a complicated picture because, I mean, as I mentioned, I'm photographing a digital camera. This is not actually linked to my camera, so this is a stage picture. I actually inserted myself in the picture right here, and I am triggering the shutter myself electronically. But at the same time, it's a real moment. It's staged, but it's also real. These young students happen to be walking by at that time. You might be listening to this and doing your own imaginary critique. Or imagine me hanging this picture on a wall in a classroom, giving this explanation. And you're like, Alec, what are you yammering on about? And my response would be, come on. I'm in art school. I'm having fun. I'm playing. I'm exploring different ideas. It's not all resolved. I'm having fun. That's what I was trying to do, is not be at the sort of grad level critique where I had to defend everything, but I'm just following impulses and trying to stay alive to things. So something similar is going on here, except this time I did insert myself in the picture. My face is actually in it, but I'm tucked away. This actually makes me think of another picture that I rediscovered while making this work, which is this one. So this is me taking a self-portrait in my garage. This is my first photo class. And I'm doing this with a timer. So I'm running over here, acting like I'm not being photographed, but being photographed. So I'm very self-conscious about hiding myself. And something like that happens in this picture where I'm tucked back here. There was also a kind of first photo class element to this, in that I was exploring something new for me, which is focus stacking, which seems like a very YouTube thing to talk about. But I was exploring deep depth of field by taking like 70 exposures, and I was also entertaining myself because like the flash is going off, big burst of flash, 70 times. I'm performing for the camera. Meanwhile, there's some like there's students in this nearby area. They have no clue what's happening over here, and I'm having a blast thinking about myself, making a connection between this sculpture and that the first sculpture that I showed. This mirror, thinking about reflection, consciousness, all the kind of stuff you think about when you're in college, existentialism, the emergence of consciousness, the duality of self, all of that. Meanwhile, that's being expressed over here on this whiteboard in a classroom. Consciousness, subjectivity, self, the subject is split, and then importantly the mirror stage. So I'm exploring the mirror stage. There's irony in this and humor, I really hope. There's also another kind of humor. So this cover, I know it's cringy for a middle-aged guy to use the word cringe, but what I was actually interested in at this time was cringe comedy. So I'm a fan of like Nathan Fielder and Tim Robinson, and a kind of comedy that actually it's another path to vulnerability. And it is something you see men of a certain sort explore. And I was using that as a vehicle for self-expression as well. But then also just like flat out comedy sometimes too. So like a picture like, where is it? A picture like this of this drawing scenario, I think is just funny. And then this picture is a little more confusing. If you look closely, you'll see paint splotches over here. And basically this image is a source image for a student working on a painting. And I like the idea of a young artist exploring masculinity or sexuality. Here something similar happens. So in this pair of pictures, you see this stripped bare dog-like figure. So it's like taxidermy, but it's been stripped down, made vulnerable. And then on this page, there's another post-it. This is not really in the book, but I'm covering up another source photograph that a painter was using of a vulva, and they were painting this giant painting of a vulva using these colors. And again, it's like that student impulse to really dive into this kind of expressive subject matter. And I appreciate that. So the book alternates between portraits and these interiors. What you don't see are any teachers, and that was a very conscious decision. So at this point, I think I'd like to talk a little bit more about Walker Evans. He's someone I thought about a lot while making this work. And one of the books I read was this, The Last Years of Walker Evans by Jerry L. Thompson. So Walker Evans, late in life, his career became really meaningful to me. So here you see, what the hell is that all about? Oh my God. Sorry. Is this thing recording? Why are there bubbles floating up on my screen? God. Okay. Are they stopping? Please stop. Okay. Well, that was curious. Okay. Walker Evans. So here he is, quite old. And what happened was when he was older, he associated himself with a lot of younger people. He was divorced, he was terribly alcoholic, and people like Jerry Thompson became his friends and confidants, and it's how he energized himself. And Jerry Thompson actually took care of him, and here is Walker's portrait of Jerry right here. And there's something about this dichotomy about old and young that I was interested in. And I guess I wanted to play the role of the old guy. I'm not Walker Evans' age, and I'm not alcoholic and not any of that. But I liked what happened there. And there's something else too. So Walker Evans, just to turn to him more directly for a second. So Walker Evans, late in life, discovered the Polaroid camera. And this book of his Polaroids, I've owned it for many, many years, and I never really paid much attention to it. There's this picture of the old Walker Evans on the cover, and then the inside are just all of these photographs that kind of look like Walker Evans pictures of signs and old cars and stuff like that. And it never really did that much for me. This is maybe his best known one, and it's fine, but I wasn't that excited about it. But I had kind of missed out on the fact that Walker Evans had taken all these other Polaroids, and some of them are reproduced in this book. So like here are the classic Walker Evans images, but then there were these pictures. And these were students that he was meeting when he was visiting schools. And you'll see that he gets very close to them. It's intense flash. And there's something kind of vampiric about them. He's like getting as close as he can and trying to like suck their energy out. And this became a model for me. And I should say that I got really immersed in those Polaroid pictures, and I actually made my own kind of like book dummy of late Evans' work. I sequenced it and everything. So let me just zoom in here and show you this. So this is not a real thing, but I just played the game of making an Evans book and combining these portraits and also self-portraits. I mean, very often I think he would just hand the camera to someone. And this effect of these mostly young people, and then this kind of expressiveness. And again, this is sort of like, this is a picture, both of these are pictures that a young person would make. These expressionistic photographs. And this is kind of almost a comic picture. They seem dark and satirical. This picture of a headstone, and then pairing it with this young boy. There's something creepy about it. And then coming back again and again to the older Evans. So while editing this work in an imaginary sort of way, nothing is to be done with it. This is where the impulse to include myself in the pictures started to happen as well. So anyway, you get the idea of that. Okay, so back to advice for young artists. Where were we? This picture. So yeah, this kind of proximity was something I was doing. Mirrors and signs of life, flowers, these sort of things reappear and again. These blossoms falling. This post-it says, accept yourself, and there's musical notation. Again, these super saturated colors, pinks. Okay, over here, this is a list of 10 rules. It's actually advice, basically. And it's advice for students. It's not my advice, though. So this was written, it's often attributed to John Cage, but it actually comes from Sister Carita. Some of you might know this recent J&L book, which is photographs by Sister Carita. Sister Carita was involved in signage and public art, but she was also a photographer and actually worked in this very childlike way with her photography. And she had a list of rules, which are not rules at all, because in fact, the last rule is we're breaking all of the rules. But this list of advice is basically my way of putting a bunch of advice in this book so that you don't feel ripped off if you buy it. So I'm not going to give you that advice now. You have to buy the book to get it, to get not my advice. These all white pictures, which I had so much fun making, they also serve as like palette cleansers with all of this color. This says something about less being more. Lots of inside jokes with myself. Lester B. Morrison, my pseudonym. Less means less is more, whatever. Now I'm rambling and sounding like a crazy person. And then following the less is more is this intense explosion of line and color. Dirty mirrors. There's this kind of, right after that less be more section is an explosion. More is more phase. Another taxidermy. And then this question, what do you want really? What do you want really? Now, the way I think of these Post-its is that I'm talking to myself. Alec, what do you really want? And my answer is that I want to be my high school art teacher. I want to give something to a young artist that's of value. That's really corny, but it's true. That's what I want. But there's something else that I want too. And that something else is that I want you to look at me and to accept me. Here I am. I'm not going to show the whole picture. This is not really in the book, although I sort of wish we had done that. But I want you to accept me, warts and all. That sort of speaks to the Post-it that says accept yourself. And this is actually a picture of Post-its on a wall. That's where the original idea probably came from. Another one of these palette cleansers. This Post-it says, everything I know. So this is another kind of a trick picture. So I have this picture enlarged in my home, and what I do is I hang it there and I just wait to see if anyone realizes what's happening here. And if they don't, sometimes I'll say, look at this nail. And then after a while, it finally clicks in that these books are minuscule. I mean, these are actually books that are made to go in a dollhouse. So they're tiny, and the information, everything I know, fits in the palm of your hand, basically. Okay, here is an interview with myself. And I guess it's at this point that it makes sense to talk more about Broken Manual. So this is the book Broken Manual. It was published when I was, what age? 38 or something like that. Maybe 40. I can't remember. But I always call it my midlife crisis book. And at a certain point, I realized that these two books are doing the same thing. Broken Manual is a manual for men who want to run away from their lives, except it doesn't work. And it's really not a manual. It's an expression of my desire to run away and also my brokenness. And so inside you have some sort of instructions on how to run away from your life, but really it's comedic, it's self-mocking, and it's an expression of my own desire to run away. Included in the book is an interview So it's Lester B. Morrison interviewing me. So that's my pseudonym interviewing myself. So what I'm doing here is very similar. Advice for Young Artists pretends to be a book of advice for young artists, but it's really an expression of someone getting older on how to deal with that and how to reinvigorate oneself. So included in this book is an interview with myself. Now here I am in my library talking to myself for over an hour, rambling maniacally. I guess part of what I'm communicating is just that. That said, there are little nuggets of advice in here, but some of it's actually practical. So like here it says, do you ever give it specific advice? And I say, I often recommend making maquettes to physically visualize one's dream of exhibiting or publishing. For photo books, I sometimes say that they should only have as many pictures as the photographer's age. So over here, I show an example of a physical maquette I made of this work. And when I use that line of a book only have as many pictures as the photographer's age, I ask myself, how old are you? I say 54. And in fact, if you look at the book, it has 54 photographs. I was adamant about that. Michael Mack definitely was pushing me to have more pictures, and I would sort of add more and then take more away, and ended up with 54. But I do think it's solid advice, and doing stuff like this and making a maquette is actually really good advice for young artists. One sort of funny inside footnote is that if you look closely at this too, along with seeing works on the wall and this little miniature figurine and this pencil, you'll see a book down here. And in fact, that is this book in mega miniature. And so even the like making of this stuff and making maquettes, this is the kind of playfulness that I try to put into each book I do and into the work I do, and is fundamentally what so much of it is about. Wow, I'm tired. That was a lot. That was a lot of information. I hope many of you you're drifting in sleep. You're listening to my voice. Your little miniature books are floating by in your head. And I hope you wake up feeling refreshed and ready to go out and make something goofy, make something new, maybe expose a little too much of yourself and make people uncomfortable. Because really, in the end, like what we're trying to do here is share with each other and remind each other of our vulnerabilities and our humanity. And that's why I'm sitting in this room talking to myself for you. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.